He wrote the words that created a nation, and he fathered the children that contradicted every one of them. Thomas Jefferson, author of the Declaration of Independence, third President of the United States, architect of American liberty. All men are created equal. 5 words that shook the 18th century, written by a man who owned over 600 enslaved people in his lifetime. For 2 centuries, America debated the rumor. Did Jefferson father children with Sally Hemings, an enslaved woman he owned? The official answer was always the same: impossible, unthinkable, beneath him. In 1998, a geneticist ended 200 years of denial with a single chromosome. Eugene Foster was a retired pathologist, not a historian, not a political scientist. A man who understood that chromosomes don't care about reputations. His team collected DNA from male-line descendants of Jefferson's family and male-line descendants of Sally Hemings's children. The test was simple. Y chromosomes pass from father to son, virtually unchanged. If Jefferson fathered Hemings's children, his Y chromosome would appear in their male-line descendants. If he didn't, it wouldn't. Binary, unambiguous, molecular. The results matched. The Y chromosome carried by Jefferson's paternal relatives was identical to the one carried by descendants of Eston Hemings, Sally's youngest son. The paper was published in Nature on the same day the Clinton impeachment hearings began. The timing wasn't accidental, but the science was bulletproof. The first piece of evidence is the DNA itself, and it is more precise than most people realize. Foster's team tested 19 male-line descendants across multiple family branches: 5 descendants of 2 sons of Jefferson's paternal uncle, 5 descendants of 2 sons of Thomas Woodson, whom oral history claimed was Jefferson and Hemings's first child, 1 descendant of Eston Hemings, and 3 descendants of the Carr nephews, the men Jefferson's family had blamed for generations. The Carr nephews didn't match. The family's 200-year alibi collapsed in a single comparison. Samuel and Peter Carr, blamed by Jefferson's white descendants since 1802, were genetically excluded. Thomas Woodson's descendants also didn't match, complicating but not undermining the broader claim. Sally Hemings had 6 children. The DNA tested only 2 lines. The second piece of evidence predated DNA by nearly 2 centuries, and it had been dismissed as slander for just as long. In 1802, journalist James Callender published the accusation in the Richmond Recorder. Jefferson kept a concubine at Monticello. Her name was Sally. She had borne him several children. Callender was a political enemy. Jefferson never responded publicly, and for 2 centuries, mainstream historians dismissed the claim as partisan mudslinging. But the Hemings family had their own oral history, passed down through generations. Madison Hemings, Sally's son, gave a detailed account in 1873 to an Ohio newspaper, naming Jefferson as his father. White historians dismissed it, a formerly enslaved man's testimony against the word of a founding father. For another century, the denial held. The third piece of evidence is statistical, and it is damning. Historian Fraser Neiman published a statistical analysis in 2000. He compared Jefferson's documented presence at Monticello against the conception windows for all 6 of Hemings's children. Jefferson was present at Monticello during the conception window for every single one. All 6. The probability of this occurring by chance, if Jefferson were not the father, was less than 1%. No other Jefferson male showed the same pattern. Not his brother Randolph. Not the Carr nephews. Only Thomas Jefferson was documented at Monticello during every conception window. DNA confirmed 1 son. Statistics correlated all 6. The historical record named him from the beginning. The fourth piece of evidence is the relationship itself, and it is far more complicated than any headline captured. Sally Hemings was the half-sister of Jefferson's dead wife. Martha Jefferson's father, John Wales, had fathered 6 children with Elizabeth Hemings, an enslaved woman he owned. Sally was one of them. When Jefferson took Sally to Paris in 1787 as a servant to his daughter, she was approximately 14 years old. He was 44. In France, Sally Hemings was legally free. French law did not recognize slavery. She could have stayed. According to Madison Hemings's testimony, she negotiated. She agreed to return to Virginia and to enslavement in exchange for Jefferson's promise to free her children when they reached adulthood. Jefferson honored that agreement. Every surviving child of Sally Hemings was freed, the only complete enslaved family he liberated, in a will that kept over 130 others in bondage. The fifth piece of evidence comes from the ground beneath Monticello itself. Monticello's archaeology program has spent decades excavating the lives of the enslaved community. Mulberry Row, the plantation's working core, housed the workshops, kitchens, and quarters where enslaved people lived. Sally Hemings's living quarters were adjacent to Jefferson's private suite, a room connected to his by a passage, not the field quarters, not the dependencies. Steps from his bedroom. In 2017, Monticello opened an exhibit dedicated to Sally Hemings's life, acknowledging the relationship publicly for the first time at the site itself. The archaeological record confirms what the DNA proved and the oral history always claimed. The relationship was real. It lasted 38 years, and it happened in the house that Liberty built. 5 lines of evidence, all converging on the same conclusion. Thomas Jefferson fathered children with Sally Hemings. But here is the twist, and it is the part that makes this case more complicated than any headline allows. The DNA proves that a Jefferson male fathered Eston Hemings, not necessarily Thomas. Any male carrying the Jefferson Y chromosome could be the father. Thomas Jefferson had a younger brother, Randolph. Randolph had 5 sons. Any of them carried the same Y chromosome. The DNA alone cannot distinguish between them. The Thomas Jefferson Heritage Society argued for Randolph. Some scholars pointed to other Jefferson males. The DNA provided a family answer, not an individual answer. But the statistical evidence, Jefferson present for all 6 conceptions, overwhelmingly favors Thomas. The conception correlation, combined with the DNA, the oral history, the living arrangements, and the unique manumission pattern, produces a case that no other Jefferson male can match. In 2000, the Thomas Jefferson Foundation's own research committee concluded that Jefferson was most likely the father of all 6 children. The institution that preserves his legacy accepted the evidence its founder tried to hide. Both statements are true simultaneously. The DNA alone is inconclusive for one individual. The combined evidence is overwhelming. The twist isn't that someone else might be the father. The twist is that America spent 2 centuries rejecting evidence that didn't require DNA at all. The denial industry ran for 200 years, and it tells us more about America than about Jefferson. Historian after historian dismissed the claim. Dumas Malone, Jefferson's most celebrated biographer, called it physically impossible, arguing Jefferson was too old and too ill. The evidence contradicts that entirely. Jefferson fathered his last child with Hemings at age 64. He lived to 83. The too ill defense was biographical fiction dressed as scholarship. The testimony of Madison Hemings, detailed, consistent, verifiable against plantation records, was dismissed because he was black. The denials of Jefferson's white descendants, vague, contradicted by evidence, and self-serving, were accepted because they were white. The second case study follows what happened to the children. Beverly and Harriet Hemings left Monticello in their 20s and passed into white society. They disappeared from the historical record. Their descendants lived as white Americans, many never knowing their origins. Eston Hemings moved to Wisconsin and changed his surname to Jefferson. He and his family also passed as white. His descendants discovered their Hemings heritage only when the DNA study made international news. Madison Hemings stayed in the black community. His descendants carried the oral history for generations. They were told the truth from the beginning, and they were disbelieved for 2 centuries. In 1999, for the first time, descendants of Jefferson's white family and descendants of Sally Hemings met at Monticello. Some embraced the connection. Others refused to attend. The third case study is about what institutions did with the evidence. Monticello transformed its interpretation. The plantation now presents the full story: Jefferson the philosopher and Jefferson the enslaver. Sally Hemings's restored room sits adjacent to his private suite. The Smithsonian updated its Jefferson exhibits. Textbooks were revised. The relationship that America had denied for 2 centuries became part of the standard historical record. But acceptance wasn't universal. The Thomas Jefferson Heritage Society still disputes the conclusion. Some descendants of Jefferson's white family refused to acknowledge Hemings's descendants as relatives. DNA proved the biological connection. It couldn't force the social one. 3 case studies. A denial industry built on racial hierarchy. Descendants split across the color line, and institutions still wrestling with a truth the molecules settled decades ago. Every chromosome told the same story. America just wasn't ready to hear it. So what does the Jefferson DNA actually tell us? Not that a founder was flawed. Every generation already knew that. What it tells us is that the evidence was always there. The oral history was always there. The plantation records were always there. DNA didn't discover the truth. It made the truth impossible to deny. There is a difference. Sally Hemings lived at Monticello for decades. She bore 6 children. She negotiated their freedom in Paris at approximately 16 years old. She navigated an impossible situation with more agency than anyone gave her credit for. And for 200 years, America chose the comfort of denial over the testimony of her own descendants. DNA didn't rewrite history. It forced America to read it. Jefferson is buried at Monticello. So are the unmarked graves of hundreds of enslaved people whose names were still recovering. His words built a nation. His DNA revealed the gap between what that nation promised and what it practiced. The evidence file is complete. 5 lines of investigation, all converging. 2 centuries of denial ended by a chromosome, not because the truth was hidden, because the truth required a technology America couldn't argue with, and a reminder that some of the most important DNA results in history don't discover new facts. They force old ones into the light. But Jefferson isn't the only founding figure whose DNA exposed what the official record tried to erase. Across the Americas and Europe, genetic genealogy is revealing relationships that power worked very hard to suppress. And the deeper researchers dig into the genetics of the powerful, the more the distance between public virtue and private reality dissolves. If one Y chromosome can rewrite the story of a nation's founding, what happens when we test the rest? Which founder's legacy doesn't survive the sequencer? Which family's secret outlasts the chromosome? The technology is available. The descendants are alive. The only barrier is whether anyone is willing to ask. If this investigation changed what you thought you knew, subscribe. Every case in this series follows the same rule. Start with the textbook, follow the DNA, and let the molecules speak for themselves. Jefferson lived 83 years. His DNA waited 2 centuries to tell the truth he never would. All sources and peer-reviewed references are linked in the description below. The question isn't whether Jefferson fathered those children, he did. The question is why it took a molecule to make America believe a family it had heard from all along. And that is a question DNA answered. But America still hasn't.